The promotion announcement echoed through the glass conference room as my colleagues erupted in applause. Congratulations to our new Vice President of Innovation, Marcus Chen, for his groundbreaking Project Phoenix proposal. I watched my supervisor shake hands with my teammate, the same teammate who had asked to collaborate on my research 6 months ago. The same research that was now being credited entirely to him. The same research that represented 3 years of my life, countless sleepless nights, and breakthrough discoveries that could revolutionize our entire industry. As Marcus smiled at the cameras, holding up the award that should have been mine, I realized this wasn't just office politics. This was systematic theft, and I was about to uncover something far worse than stolen credit. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Meridian Technologies. I arrived at 6:47 a.m., 43 minutes before anyone else, just as I had for the past 4 years. The security guard, Carlos, waved from his desk as I badged into the building. The elevator hummed its familiar tune as it carried me to the 15th floor, where our research and development department occupied the entire northern wing. My cubicle sat in the corner, deliberately chosen for its proximity to the supply closet and copy machine. Not glamorous, but practical. I needed easy access to resources when inspiration struck, which happened frequently during those early morning hours when the office was empty and my mind could wander freely through complex algorithms and innovative solutions. I settled into my ergonomic chair, the one I had purchased with my own money after my third request for office furniture was denied due to budget constraints. The morning ritual began, coffee from my personal machine, not the break room swill, followed by a review of overnight emails and a scan of industry publications. This particular Tuesday brought exciting news from MIT about advances in quantum computing that could potentially accelerate my current project by months. Project Phoenix had consumed my professional life for 3 years. The concept was elegantly simple yet revolutionary. A machine learning algorithm that could predict and prevent system failures across entire corporate networks before they occurred. Not just detect them, but actually prevent them through predictive maintenance protocols that would save companies millions in downtime and lost productivity. The breakthrough had come during a particularly brutal December weekend when I had stayed in the office for 36 straight hours, surviving on vending machine snacks and determination. The algorithm finally clicked into place at 3:17 a.m. on a Sunday, when the building was so quiet I could hear the heating system cycling through distant vents. I had cracked the predictive modeling problem that had stumped our entire industry for years. Marcus Chen occupied the cubicle directly across from mine. We had started at Meridian within 2 weeks of each other, fresh out of graduate programs, eager to prove ourselves in the corporate world. Marcus was charming, effortlessly social, the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and organized happy hour gatherings that somehow everyone attended despite the company's demanding schedule. I respected Marcus, even liked him. He had a way of making complex technical concepts accessible to our less technical colleagues, a skill I admired but never quite mastered. While I buried myself in research and development, Marcus excelled at presentations and client interactions. We seemed to complement each other perfectly, which is why his request for collaboration had felt natural, even flattering. "Elena, I've been watching your work on the predictive algorithms," he had said one afternoon in March, perching on the edge of my desk with his characteristic easy smile. "The concepts are brilliant, but you know how this company works. Innovation means nothing if you can't sell it to the board. What if we work together? I could help translate your technical achievements into something that resonates with the decision makers." The offer made sense. Marcus had connections throughout the company that I lacked. He understood the political landscape, knew which executives valued what types of presentations, could navigate the bureaucratic maze that often killed promising projects before they reached implementation. My technical skills combined with his business acumen seemed like a natural partnership. I agreed to share my research, providing Marcus with detailed documentation, prototype demonstrations, and comprehensive analysis of potential applications. We spent weeks in conference rooms, with me explaining the intricate details of my algorithms, while he took copious notes and asked insightful questions about commercial viability and scalability. "This could change everything," Marcus had said. During one late-night session, his enthusiasm apparent as he reviewed my latest test results. "Elena, you've created something that could revolutionize how businesses approach system maintenance. We need to get this in front of the right people." I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? We were colleagues, working toward the same goal of advancing our company's technological capabilities and, hopefully, our own careers in the process. Marcus handled the business development side while I continued refining the technical aspects, a division of labor that played to our respective strengths. The weeks that followed were filled with anticipation. Marcus scheduled meetings with department heads, prepared presentation materials, and worked his network of contacts to build support for what we had begun calling Project Phoenix. I remained focused on the technical development, fine-tuning algorithms and conducting extensive testing to ensure our solution would perform flawlessly under real-world conditions. This morning's company-wide meeting was supposed to be the culmination of months of collaborative effort. The email announcement had been vague. All staff meeting to discuss major innovation developments and organizational changes. Attendance mandatory. I had assumed it would be the formal introduction of Project Phoenix to the broader company, possibly followed by announcements about expanded budgets and team assignments for implementation. I entered the main conference room at 9:15 a.m., 15 minutes early as usual. The space buzzed with conversations as employees from every department filed in, creating an energy level unusual for our typically reserved corporate environment. Marcus was already there, standing near the front of the room, engaging in animated conversation with several executives I recognized, but rarely interacted with directly. Our CEO, Janet Morrison, called for attention at exactly 9:30 a.m. Janet was known for her precision, her no-nonsense approach to business, and her ability to identify and promote innovative thinking within our organization. She had built Meridian Technologies from a small consulting firm into a major player in the corporate software industry through careful strategic planning and an eye for emerging technologies. "Today marks a significant milestone for our company," Janet began, her voice carrying easily through the room. "Innovation has always been our cornerstone, and today we recognize exceptional achievement that will position Meridian Technologies at the forefront of our industry for years to come." I felt a flutter of nervous excitement. This was it. The moment when Project Phoenix would be introduced to the entire company, when months of technical development and business planning would finally receive the recognition and support needed for full implementation. It gives me great pleasure to announce the promotion of Marcus Chen to Vice President of Innovation, effective immediately. Marcus has developed a groundbreaking solution that addresses one of the most persistent challenges facing our industry: predicting and preventing system failures before they occur. The room erupted in applause. Colleagues turned to offer congratulations. To Marcus, who stood with a modest smile, accepting handshakes and backpats with gracious humility. I found myself clapping mechanically, my brain struggling to process what I was hearing. "Project Phoenix," Janet continued, "represents exactly the kind of forward-thinking innovation that will drive our company's growth. Marcus's predictive maintenance algorithms could save our clients millions in preventing downtime while establishing Meridian as the clear leader in proactive system management." My hands stopped clapping. The words felt surreal, as if I were listening to a conversation happening in another dimension. Project Phoenix. My Project Phoenix. The algorithms I had developed, the breakthrough I had achieved during that December weekend, the research I had shared with Marcus as a collaborator. "Marcus will be presenting the technical details at next week's client conference," Janet announced. "This innovation could secure contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. Please join me in congratulating our newest vice president and the brilliant mind behind Project Phoenix. The applause continued, louder this time. Marcus stepped forward, his expression perfectly balanced between pride and humility. Thank you, Janet. This project has been my passion for the past year, and I'm excited to see where it leads our company. Innovation requires dedication, long hours, and sometimes working alone when everyone else has gone home. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute something meaningful to our industry. Working alone. The words hit like a physical blow. I watched Marcus accept congratulations from colleagues, watched him shake hands with executives who were already discussing implementation timelines and client presentations. Every word of praise, every expression of admiration, every prediction of success was based on my work, my discoveries, my 3 years of dedicated research. But somehow, in this room filled with applause and celebration, I had become invisible. The algorithms that had consumed my professional life, the breakthrough that represented my greatest achievement, the innovation that could define my career, all of it was now attributed to someone else. Not just attributed, but completely transferred, as if I had never existed in the equation at all. Janet continued speaking about strategic planning and market opportunities, but her words faded into background noise. I sat frozen in my chair, watching Marcus field questions about his research with answers that drew directly from our collaborative sessions. Every technical detail he shared, every application he described, every benefit he highlighted came from documentation I had created and shared in good faith. The meeting concluded with discussions of implementation teams and budget allocations. Marcus would lead an expanded research division, hire additional staff, oversee the development of complementary technologies. He would represent the company at industry conferences, serve as the public face of our innovation efforts, build his career on the foundation of my stolen work. As colleagues began filing out of the conference room, many stopped to congratulate Marcus personally. I remained seated, watching this surreal scene unfold, trying to understand how collaboration had become theft, how partnership had become betrayal, how my greatest professional achievement had vanished from existence while I sat in the same room where it was being celebrated. Marcus approached my table, his expression showing what appeared to be genuine concern. "Elena, you look pale. Are you feeling all right? I know company meetings can be overwhelming, but this is exciting news for our department. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of acknowledgement, any indication that he remembered who had actually developed the algorithms he was now taking credit for. But his expression showed nothing beyond friendly concern for a colleague who appeared unwell. "Congratulations," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant even to myself. "Project Phoenix is really something special." "Thank you," Marcus replied with a warm smile. "It's been incredibly rewarding to work on. I hope this opens up opportunities for everyone in our department. Innovation benefits the whole team. The whole team. As if there had been a team. As if my individual contribution was just part of some collective effort, where credit could be distributed arbitrarily." I nodded silently, not trusting myself to speak without saying something that might reveal the storm building inside my chest. Marcus walked away, immediately surrounded by colleagues eager to discuss his promotion and the exciting future of Project Phoenix. I sat alone at the empty conference table, surrounded by the residual energy of celebration and congratulation, feeling as if I had just witnessed my own professional funeral. The morning that had started like any other Tuesday had transformed into something completely different. Not just disappointing, but fundamentally wrong. Not just unfair, but systematically dishonest. And as I sat in that empty conference room, listening to distant conversations about Marcus's brilliant innovation, I realized this was only the beginning. of a much deeper problem. The elevator ride back to the 15th floor felt endless. Each floor that passed gave me more time to process what had just happened, and with each passing second, the reality became more concrete and more devastating. By the time the doors opened to reveal our familiar R&D department, I had moved beyond shock into something colder, more analytical. I walked past Marcus's empty cubicle. He was probably still downstairs accepting congratulations and discussing his new role, and settled at my desk. The same desk where I had spent countless hours developing the algorithms that were now making him a vice president. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sitting in the exact spot where the real work had been done, while he was somewhere else receiving credit for it. My computer screen still displayed the quantum computing article I had been reading that morning, back when my biggest concern was whether new research might accelerate my timeline. That version of myself, the one from 3 hours ago, seemed almost naive now. She had believed that hard work and innovation would be recognized and rewarded. She had trusted that collaboration meant mutual benefit and shared credit. I minimized the browser and opened my project files. Everything was still there, exactly as I had left it. 3 years of research, documentation, test results, algorithm iterations, and breakthrough analyses. All of it time-stamped, all of it bearing my digital signature, all of it proving beyond any doubt that Project Phoenix was my creation. But as I scrolled through the files, a disturbing thought began to take shape. If Marcus was presenting this as his own work, what documentation did he have? How was he planning to support his claims? More importantly, what had he done with the materials I had shared with him during our collaboration? I pulled up my email archive and began searching for communications with Marcus. The results painted a picture I hadn't fully appreciated before. Our email exchanges were carefully one-sided. He had asked questions, requested clarifications, and solicited additional materials. I had responded with detailed explanations, attached comprehensive files, and provided everything he claimed he needed for the business development side of our partnership. But Marcus's emails contained no original technical content. No research contributions, no algorithm improvements, no innovative insights. He had positioned himself as the business liaison, the person who would translate my technical achievements into corporate success. Looking back through months of correspondence, I realized he had systematically collected my intellectual property while contributing nothing substantive in return. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Marcus would request specific information for presentation purposes or stakeholder meetings. I would provide detailed technical documentation, assuming it would be used to support our joint project. But now I understood that he had been building his own complete archive of my work, preparing for the day when he could present it as his own achievement. I found the folder where I kept backup copies of everything I had shared with him. The file. Dates told a story I was only now beginning to understand. Every major breakthrough in Project Phoenix had been documented and shared with Marcus within days of my discovery. He had a complete record of my development process, my thinking, my solutions to complex problems. From his perspective, he possessed all the evidence needed to claim ownership of the innovation. But I had something he didn't know about. The original, development files complete with metadata, revision histories, and timestamps that proved the true sequence of creation. Every algorithm he claimed to have developed existed first in my personal workspace, often weeks or months before I shared it with him. The digital footprint was irrefutable. I began creating a new folder, Phoenix Evidence. Into it, I copied every relevant file, organizing them chronologically to demonstrate the true development timeline: email threads, technical documents, test results, algorithm iterations. Everything arranged to show conclusively that Project Phoenix was my creation, not his. As I worked, I became aware of voices in the hallway. Marcus had returned from his celebration, surrounded by colleagues offering continued congratulations. I could hear him discussing his vision for the expanded innovation department, his plans for hiring additional staff, his excitement about representing Meridian at upcoming industry conferences. The breakthrough came during a particularly intense development period, he was saying to someone, his voice carrying clearly through the thin cubicle walls. Sometimes innovation requires complete dedication, working through weekends, pushing through when you're not sure if your approach will work. But when it finally clicked, I knew we had something special. I froze at my keyboard. He was describing my December weekend, the 36-hour session that had led to the final breakthrough. But he was describing it as his own experience, his own moment of discovery. Not only had he stolen my work, he was now stealing my personal memories, my individual moments of triumph. This was worse than simple credit theft. This was identity theft on a professional level. Marcus wasn't just claiming ownership of my algorithms. He was rewriting history to position himself as the innovative genius who had solved an industry-wide problem through personal dedication and brilliant insights. I needed to understand the full scope of what had happened. Opening a new browser window, I navigated to our company's internal project management system. Every research initiative was tracked here, with detailed records of participants, timelines, and resource allocations. I searched for Project Phoenix. The results were chilling. According to the official records, Marcus Chen was listed as the primary researcher and project lead. The start date matched exactly with when I had first shared my preliminary findings with him. My name appeared nowhere in the documentation. As far as the corporate system was concerned, I had never been involved with Project Phoenix at all. But this created an obvious problem for Marcus. If the official records showed him as the sole contributor, how would he explain the extensive email correspondence between us? How would he account for the fact that I possessed detailed technical knowledge about algorithms he claimed to have developed independently? I began searching through our shared project folders, looking for clues about how he had managed this deception. What I found was systematic and thorough. Every document I had created and shared had been copied into folders bearing his name and digital signature. But more than that, he had created false revision histories, backdated documents, and fabricated evidence of independent development. The sophistication of the deception was breathtaking. Marcus hadn't simply stolen my work. He had created an entire fictional narrative of his own development process, complete with supporting documentation. That would be difficult to challenge without the kind of detailed investigation I was now conducting. But he had made one crucial mistake. In his effort to create a convincing timeline, he had relied heavily on the technical specifications and implementation details I had provided during our collaboration. This meant his fabricated documents contained specific language, unique approaches, and distinctive methodological choices that matched my original work exactly. I began creating side-by-side comparisons, my original files next to his fabricated versions. The correlation was perfect. Not just similar, but identical in ways that could only result from direct copying. Technical terminology I had invented, algorithm structures I had developed, even variable names I had chosen, all of it reproduced exactly in his false documentation. This level of precise duplication would be impossible to explain as coincidence or independent development. If challenged, Marcus would have to claim either that we had somehow arrived at identical solutions through parallel research, or that one of us had influenced the other's work. But the timestamps on my original files predated his fabricated versions by weeks or months in every case. As I documented these discoveries, I realized I was building something more than just evidence of theft. I was constructing proof of a systematic fraud that could destroy Marcus's career and potentially expose him to serious legal consequences. Copyright infringement, intellectual property theft, corporate fraud. The potential charges were significant. But I also understood that proving theft was only part of the challenge. Marcus now occupied a position of power within the company. He had Janet Morrison's support, executive backing for his expanded role, and the corporate momentum that comes with a successful product launch. Challenging him would mean going up against not just an individual, but an entire organizational structure that had already invested in his success. My phone buzzed with a text message from my friend Sarah in the marketing department. Heard about Marcus's promotion. So exciting that your department is getting recognition. Maybe some of that innovation budget will trickle down to the rest of us. Sarah's message highlighted another layer of the problem. As far as the company was concerned, this was a success story. Marcus's promotion represented exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership and innovative development that Meridian wanted to encourage. Challenging that narrative would require not just evidence of theft, but a willingness to disrupt, a story that everyone wanted to believe. I spent the rest of the afternoon methodically documenting every aspect of the fraud. Email threads, file timestamps, revision histories, shared documents. Everything organized into a comprehensive picture of how Marcus had systematically appropriated my work while creating false evidence of his own development process. The deeper I dug, the more elaborate the deception became. Marcus had created fake brainstorming notes, backdated research proposals, and fabricated correspondence with external consultants. He had built an entire fictional world in which he was the innovative genius behind Project Phoenix, complete, with supporting materials that would convince anyone who didn't have access to the original development records. But I had those records. Every genuine document, every real timestamp, every authentic piece of evidence that proved the true story of how Project Phoenix had been created. The question now was what to do with that evidence. As the office began emptying for the day, I remained at my desk, surrounded by digital proof of the most significant professional betrayal I had ever experienced. Marcus had left hours earlier, probably celebrating his promotion at some upscale restaurant, toasting his success with colleagues who had no idea they were congratulating a fraud. The building grew quiet around me, just as it had during those early morning hours when I did my best work. But tonight felt different. Instead of developing algorithms or solving technical problems, I was planning something else entirely. I was preparing for war. Marcus had made a critical error. In his eagerness to steal credit for my innovation, he had underestimated both my ability to prove ownership and my willingness to fight for what was rightfully mine. He had assumed that I would accept the theft quietly, perhaps even convince myself that our collaboration had somehow justified his complete appropriation of my work. He was about to discover how wrong he had been. Thursday morning arrived with an unusual energy in the office. Word of Marcus's promotion had spread throughout the building, and the R&D department buzzed with excitement about expanded budgets, new hiring opportunities, and the prestige that came with having produced the company's next breakthrough innovation. Several colleagues stopped by my cubicle to share their enthusiasm about working under Marcus's leadership in the newly structured innovation division. "It's incredible what Marcus accomplished," said Jennifer from the systems analysis team, perching on the edge of my desk. 3 years of solo research culminating in something that could revolutionize the entire industry. I heard Janet is already fielding calls from Fortune 500 companies wanting demonstrations. I smiled politely and nodded, but internally I was calculating timing. Marcus would be in meetings most of the morning, discussing organizational restructuring and resource allocation for his new role. The perfect opportunity for what I had planned would come during the lunch hour, when the office would be relatively empty, but Marcus would likely be at his desk, preparing for his afternoon presentation to the board of directors. The presentation. According to the schedule that had been circulated yesterday, Marcus would be delivering a comprehensive technical overview of Project Phoenix to the full board at 2 p.m. This would be his first major test as the newly promoted vice president of innovation, his opportunity to demonstrate mastery of the technology he claimed to have developed. I spent the morning finalizing my evidence compilation. Every document was organized chronologically, every email thread was complete, every timestamp was verified. I had created a comprehensive timeline that showed conclusively how Project Phoenix had actually been developed, contrasted with Marcus's fabricated version of events. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. But more importantly, I had identified specific technical details that Marcus would never be able to explain or defend. Deep algorithmic structures that required intimate knowledge of the development process, implementation choices that made sense only in the context of my original research approach, and optimization techniques that I had discovered through months of trial and error. If Marcus truly understood the technology he was claiming as his own, he should be able to explain these details fluently. If he couldn't, his fraud would be exposed in real time, in front of witnesses who could verify his lack of genuine technical knowledge. At 11:45 a.m., I gathered my evidence files and walked toward Marcus's cubicle. He was exactly where I had expected, to find him, hunched over his laptop, surrounded by printouts and presentation materials. His jacket was draped over his chair back, his sleeves rolled up, projecting the image of a dedicated innovator preparing for his moment of triumph. "Marcus," I said, my voice calm and professional. "Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to discuss Project Phoenix with you." He looked up with a bright smile, the same warm expression he had worn throughout our months of collaboration. "Elena, absolutely. Always happy to talk about innovation with a colleague. Are you interested in joining the expanded team? I'm going to need experienced researchers who understand cutting-edge development." I sat down in the chair beside his desk, noting how confidently he maintained eye contact, how naturally he spoke about his innovation. Either he was a remarkably skilled actor, or he had somehow convinced himself that the theft was justified. "Actually," I said, opening my folder, "I wanted to ask you some specific technical questions about the algorithms. I've been reviewing the documentation, and there are some implementation details I'm curious about." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, I love talking through the technical aspects. It's such a complex system, but once you understand the core principles, it's really elegant in its simplicity." I pulled out a detailed technical diagram, one of my original algorithm flowcharts that I had never shared with anyone. "Can you walk me through the decision tree optimization process? Specifically, how did you handle the recursive validation loops?" Marcus glanced at the diagram, his confident expression flickering slightly. "Well, the recursive validation, that's a sophisticated component. The basic approach involves iterative refinement of the decision parameters." He was speaking in generalities, using technical buzzwords without demonstrating actual understanding of the specific processes. I pressed deeper. "But how did you solve the infinite recursion problem? The standard approaches all lead to computational deadlocks when dealing with the complexity level required for predictive maintenance." Marcus paused, his fingers drumming against his desk. "The infinite recursion issue? Yes, that was challenging. I implemented a novel approach using adaptive threshold management to prevent the deadlock scenarios." Adaptive threshold management was meaningless jargon. The real solution involved a completely different approach that I had developed after weeks of struggling with exactly this problem. Marcus clearly had no idea how the algorithms actually functioned at a technical level. "That's interesting," I continued, pulling out another document. "Can you explain the variable naming convention you used? I notice you chose delta phase for the temporal adjustment parameter. What was your reasoning for that specific terminology?" The color began draining from Marcus's face. Delta phase was a variable name I had invented during my December breakthrough weekend, chosen for very specific mathematical reasons related to wave function analysis. It wasn't standard terminology, and there was no way Marcus could explain why he would have chosen that exact name unless he had simply copied it from my code. The naming convention. Well, delta phase seemed appropriate for the temporal aspects of the algorithm. It's fairly standard in predictive modeling contexts. It absolutely was not standard, and Marcus knew I knew it. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes that this conversation was not going the way he had expected. "Marcus," I said, my voice still calm but carrying a new edge, "I think we need to have a more direct conversation about Project Phoenix." I placed a stack of documents on his desk, my original research files, complete with timestamps showing development dates months before he claimed to have begun his work, email threads showing how I had shared technical details with him, side-by-side comparisons of my authentic documents and his fabricated versions. "This is my work," I said simply. "All of it. The algorithms, the implementation approach, the optimization, techniques, even the variable names you couldn't explain. You didn't develop Project Phoenix. You stole it." Marcus stared at the documents, his face cycling through a range of expressions: surprise, calculation, defiance, and finally, a cold smile that was completely different from his usual warm demeanor. "Elena," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "I think you're confused about how collaborative research works in a corporate environment. Yes, we discussed these concepts together. Yes, you provided input on various technical aspects, but the overall vision, the strategic implementation, the business applications, all of that was my contribution." "Your contribution?" I pulled out printed copies of our email correspondence. "Show me one technical insight you provided, one original algorithm you developed, one problem you solved independently. All you did was ask questions and collect my answers." Marcus leaned back, in his chair, his expression hardening. "You're being naive, Elena. Ideas are worthless without execution. Implementation is worthless without business strategy. I took scattered technical concepts and turned them into a coherent innovation that can actually generate revenue. That's the difference between a researcher and a leader. Scattered technical concepts." My voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby cubicles. "Those scattered concepts represent 3 years of dedicated research. The breakthrough that makes this technology possible happened during a weekend when you were nowhere near this office. The core algorithms exist in my files months before you ever claimed to be working on this project." "Files can be manipulated," Marcus said dismissively. "Timestamps can be altered. What matters is the official project documentation, and that clearly shows my leadership role from the beginning." The audacity was breathtaking. He was simultaneously admitting to the theft while claiming that his fabricated evidence was more legitimate than my authentic development records. "Your official documentation is fraud," I said, spreading out more comparisons. "Look at this code structure. These are my variable names, my optimization techniques, my implementation choices. You copied everything exactly, including algorithmic approaches that would be impossible to duplicate independently." Marcus glanced around the office, aware that our conversation was attracting attention from colleagues. He lowered his voice, but his tone remained coldly dismissive. "Elena, you're embarrassing yourself. This sounds like jealousy, not legitimate concern. I understand that seeing a colleague succeed can be difficult, but making accusations of theft isn't going to advance your own career. This isn't about career advancement. This is about 3 years of my life that you've stolen to build your promotion." "I haven't stolen anything," Marcus replied firmly. "I've taken collaborative research and developed it into something commercially viable. That's exactly what innovation leadership requires. If you had the vision and business skills to do that yourself, you would have done it." The conversation was spiraling exactly as I had anticipated. Marcus was falling back on corporate buzzwords and character assassination, trying to reframe the theft as a legitimate difference in contribution levels. But he still hadn't explained how he could have independently developed identical technical solutions, and his inability to discuss the actual algorithmic details had exposed his fundamental lack of understanding. "Marcus," I said, gathering my documents, "you're going to present this technology to the board in 2 hours. Are you prepared to answer detailed technical questions about implementation? Can you explain the mathematical foundations of the predictive modeling? Do you understand why the recursive validation approach works? Or are you just planning to use more meaningless jargon? For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely worried. A board presentation would involve executives who, while not technical, experts themselves, would expect the presenter to demonstrate comprehensive knowledge of his own innovation. The board presentation will focus on strategic applications and revenue potential, he said. Technical implementation details are secondary to business impact. Technical implementation is what makes the business impact possible, I countered. Without understanding how the algorithms actually function, you can't accurately represent their capabilities or limitations to potential clients. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. Elena, this conversation is over. I don't know what you think you're trying to accomplish, but I won't tolerate accusations and harassment from a colleague. If you have concerns about project attribution, you can take them up with HR through proper channels. I will, I said, rising to match his stance. Along with documentation proving systematic fraud and intellectual property theft. The board might be very interested to learn that their new vice president of innovation can't explain how his own algorithms work. Marcus's face flushed with anger and fear. You're making a serious mistake, Elena. This company values team players and collaborative spirit. Undermining colleagues with false accusations isn't going to be viewed favorably by management. False accusations? I held up the technical diagram I had shown him earlier. This document contains algorithmic structures that you couldn't explain 5 minutes ago. If you develop this technology, prove it. Explain the mathematical foundations. Describe the implementation process. Show me your original research notes. Marcus glanced around the office again, clearly uncomfortable with the attention our confrontation was drawing. Several colleagues had stopped working and were openly listening to our exchange. I don't have to prove anything to you, he said. Finally. My work speaks for itself, and the company has already recognized its value. If you want to waste your time and damage your reputation with baseless accusations, that's your choice. He sat back down and began shuffling through his presentation materials, clearly trying to signal that our conversation was finished. But I remained standing beside his desk, my evidence folder still open. Marcus, I said quietly, you have 2 hours before your board presentation. 2 hours to prepare for questions about technology you don't actually understand. I suggest you use that time wisely. As I walked back to my cubicle, I could feel the stares of colleagues who had witnessed the confrontation. Word would spread quickly through the office. Elena had accused Marcus of stealing her work. By the end of the day, everyone in the R&D department would have heard some version of the story. But Marcus had revealed something crucial during our exchange. He was planning to avoid technical details during his board presentation, focusing instead on business applications and revenue potential. This meant he was vulnerable to direct questioning about implementation specifics, exactly the kind of questioning I could facilitate if I positioned myself correctly. The real confrontation was just beginning. The board presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the executive conference room on the 22nd floor. By 1:30 p.m., I had positioned myself strategically in the adjacent hallway, ostensibly reviewing quarterly reports on my tablet while actually monitoring the arrivals of board members and senior executives. Janet Morrison arrived first, followed by the Chief Technology Officer, David Park, and 3 external board members whose expertise in emerging technologies made them particularly relevant to today's discussion. Marcus appeared at 1:55 p.m. carrying a leather portfolio and projector remote, his confident stride suggesting he had convinced himself that our earlier confrontation was merely a minor distraction. He greeted the executives with handshakes and smiles, playing perfectly the role of innovative leader ready to present his breakthrough achievement. What Marcus didn't know was that I had spent the past 2 hours making strategic phone calls. My first call was to David Park's assistant, requesting a brief meeting after the board presentation to discuss technical aspects of the Phoenix implementation that might require additional R&D support. My second call was to the legal department, scheduling a consultation about intellectual property documentation procedures. My third call was to the company's external patent attorney, inquiring about prior art searches for predictive maintenance algorithms. Each call had served a dual purpose, establishing my legitimate interest in Project Phoenix while creating a paper trail of my technical involvement that would be difficult to dismiss or explain away. At exactly 2 p.m., the conference. Room doors closed and Marcus began his presentation. The walls were thick, but I could occasionally hear his voice through the ventilation system, speaking in the confident tones of someone presenting his life's work to corporate leadership. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer in Systems Analysis. Can you come to Conference Room B? We're having an emergency discussion about some discrepancies in the Phoenix documentation. I found Jennifer with 2 other colleagues from our department, Robert from Database Architecture and Lisa from Quality Assurance. The 3 of them were hunched over laptops, examining technical documents with expressions of growing confusion and concern. Elena, Jennifer said without preamble, we need to ask you something, and we need you to be completely honest. Did you work on Project Phoenix? The question hung in the air with unexpected weight. I had anticipated that word of my confrontation with Marcus would spread, but I hadn't expected my colleagues to conduct their own investigation. What kind of documentation are you looking at? I asked, settling into a chair across from them. Robert turned his laptop screen toward me. Marcus sent us these technical specifications this morning, asking us to review integration requirements for the expanded implementation. But some of these algorithmic approaches look familiar. Very familiar. On his screen was a detailed technical document outlining the core Phoenix algorithms. But it wasn't one of Marcus's fabricated files. It was one of my original research papers from 18 months ago, complete with my analysis of computational complexity and optimization strategies. This is my work, I said simply. I wrote this document in March of last year. Lisa leaned forward, her expression serious. Marcus is presenting this as his current research to the board right now. But if you wrote it 18 months ago, that means Marcus has been lying about the development timeline, Jennifer finished. Elena, how much of Project Phoenix did you actually create? I opened my tablet and showed them the comprehensive evidence compilation I had prepared, file after file of original research, time-stamped months before Marcus claimed to have begun his work. Email threads showing how I had shared technical details with him. Development logs proving that every major breakthrough had originated in my personal workspace. All of it, I said. Marcus contributed nothing technical. He positioned himself as a business liaison, collecting my research under the pretense of collaboration, then created false documentation to support a claim of independent development. Robert whistled low. This is massive fraud. Elena, do you understand what this means? Marcus just got promoted to VP based on stolen work. The board is approving budgets and strategic plans based on his false presentation of capabilities. It gets worse, I continued, showing them the side-by-side comparisons of authentic versus fabricated documents. Marcus created an entire fictional development history, complete with backdated files and fake research logs. This isn't just credit theft. It's systematic corporate fraud. Lisa's face had gone pale. The company is about to sign multi-million-dollar contracts based on this technology. If clients discover that our VP of Innovation doesn't actually understand the systems he's selling, the legal exposure would be enormous, Jennifer added. False representation, breach of contract, potentially criminal fraud charges. We sat in stunned silence as the implications settled over us. This wasn't just about my stolen work anymore. Marcus's fraud was creating corporate liability that could damage the entire company's reputation and financial stability. My phone buzzed, with an urgent text from David Park's assistant. CTO requests immediate meeting. Executive conference room. Urgent technical questions about Phoenix implementation. The board presentation must have raised concerns, I said, gathering my materials. They're asking technical questions that Marcus can't answer. As I headed toward the elevator, Jennifer called after me. Elena, we're documenting everything. We found, whatever happens in that meeting, you have our full support. The 22nd floor felt different from our usual R&D environment. Thicker carpets, mahogany paneling, and an atmosphere of executive authority that made even routine conversations feel weighty. David Park's assistant directed me to the executive conference room, where I found a scene of barely controlled corporate crisis. Marcus sat at one end of the long table, his confident demeanor replaced by obvious stress. His presentation materials were scattered across the surface, and his laptop screen showed a technical diagram that I recognized as one of my original algorithm flowcharts, one I had never shared with him. David Park stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, having apparently been attempting to work through some technical problem. 3 board members remained in their seats, their expressions ranging from confusion to concern. Janet Morrison occupied her usual position at the head of the table, but her typical composed authority was strained. Elena, David said as I entered, thank you for coming so quickly. We've encountered some technical questions about Project Phoenix that require clarification. He gestured toward the whiteboard, where he had attempted to diagram the predictive algorithm structure based on Marcus's presentation. The diagram was incomplete and contained several fundamental errors that would make the system non-functional. Marcus has been explaining the implementation approach, David continued, but some of the technical details seem inconsistent with the documentation he provided. Since you work in the same department, we hoped you might be able to clarify the algorithmic foundations. I looked at Marcus, whose face showed a mixture of desperation and barely controlled anger. He knew exactly what was happening. His lack of genuine technical knowledge was being exposed in real time, in front of the people who had just promoted him based on stolen work. Of course, I said, approaching the whiteboard. What specific aspects need clarification? Janet spoke up. The board is concerned about scalability. Marcus explained that the system uses recursive validation loops, but when we asked about computational complexity, his answers were vague. I picked up the marker and began correcting David's diagram. The recursive validation approach requires careful optimization to prevent infinite loops and computational deadlocks. The solution involves implementing bounded recursion with adaptive threshold management. As I spoke, I could see Marcus recognizing the technical terminology, the same concepts he had failed to explain during our morning confrontation. But now his lack of understanding was being exposed to the entire corporate leadership team. The key insight, I continued, adding mathematical notations to the diagram, is that traditional recursive approaches fail at the complexity level required for enterprise-scale predictive maintenance. The breakthrough came from applying wave function analysis to the temporal adjustment parameters. David nodded, his expression showing recognition of genuine technical expertise. That's exactly what was missing from the presentation. Marcus, can you explain how you developed this wave function approach? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited for him to demonstrate knowledge of his own supposed innovation. The wave function methodology, he began, then stopped. It's a complex mathematical framework that requires detailed explanation. We have time, Janet said firmly. This is a critical component of our strategic planning. Marcus looked trapped. He couldn't explain concepts he didn't understand, but admitting ignorance would expose his fraud immediately. Actually, I said, there might be some confusion about the development timeline. Could I see the original research documentation that supports this approach? I knew Marcus had no original documentation because none existed. Everything he possessed was either stolen from me or fabricated after the fact. Marcus shuffled through his papers desperately. The original research files they're in my office workspace. These are just presentation summaries. David frowned. Marcus, we need to see comprehensive technical documentation before approving the budget expansion. Can you provide complete development records, including preliminary research, algorithm iterations, and testing results? Of course, Marcus said, his voice tight with strain. I'll compile everything and have it ready by tomorrow morning. But I could see in his eyes that he knew he was trapped. Comprehensive technical documentation would require genuine understanding of algorithmic development, mathematical foundations, and implementation processes that he simply didn't possess. Actually, I said carefully, I might be able to help expedite that process. I've been working on related predictive modeling research, and I have extensive documentation that might provide useful context. Janet looked interested. What kind of related research? I opened my tablet and displayed my original Phoenix development timeline. I've been developing predictive maintenance algorithms for the past 3 years. The approaches have significant overlap with what Marcus presented today. As I showed them my authentic research files, complete with timestamps and development logs, I could see the board members beginning to understand the implications. The technical content was identical to Marcus's presentation, but my documentation predated his supposed development by months. David examined the timestamps carefully. Elena, this documentation shows breakthrough development in December of last year. Marcus, didn't you say your major breakthrough occurred in February? Marcus's face had gone pale. There might be some confusion about the specific timeline. Elena and I collaborated on certain technical aspects. How? Janet asked sharply. Your presentation described this as independent research developed under your leadership. The room fell silent as the corporate leadership realized they were witnessing the exposure of systematic fraud. Marcus had built his promotion on stolen work, created false documentation, and misrepresented his capabilities to the board of directors. But even as I watched Marcus's deception crumble, I realized this was only the beginning. His fraud had implications beyond simple credit theft. Corporate contracts, client relationships, and strategic partnerships were all based on his false representation of technical capabilities. The real reckoning was about to begin. The silence in the executive conference room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Janet Morrison's eyes moved between Marcus's panicked face and my tablet displaying the authentic development timeline. The mathematical equations I had written on the whiteboard stood as silent testimony to genuine technical expertise, while Marcus's inability to explain his own supposed breakthrough became more obvious with each passing second. David Park broke the silence first. I think we need to suspend this meeting and conduct a thorough review of the project documentation. His voice carried the careful neutrality of an executive who recognized a potential corporate catastrophe unfolding in real time. Agreed, Janet said, her tone sharp with authority. Marcus, I want comprehensive technical documentation on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Original research notes, development logs, algorithm iterations, testing results, everything that supports your claims about Project Phoenix. Marcus nodded quickly, but I could see the desperation in his eyes. He knew he couldn't produce authentic documentation because none existed. His only hope was to somehow fabricate convincing materials overnight, but the level of technical detail required would be impossible to fake convincingly. Elena, Janet continued, I want you to prepare a detailed report of your own research, timeline for comparison. If there's overlap between your work and Marcus's project, we need to understand the exact nature of that relationship. As the meeting adjourned, I watched Marcus gather his scattered presentation materials with shaking hands. The confident executive who had entered this room an hour ago had been replaced by a man facing the imminent collapse of his career and reputation. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. As I packed my tablet, Marcus approached me with an expression I had never seen before. Cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of the friendly charm he had maintained throughout our supposed collaboration. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying an unmistakable menace. "This company doesn't reward troublemakers, Elena. Destroying a colleague's career won't advance your own." "I'm not destroying your career," I replied evenly. "I'm protecting my own work from theft." Marcus glanced around to ensure the executives had left the room, then stepped closer. "You think this ends here? You think exposing me somehow makes you the winner? You have no understanding of how this company really works." There was something in his tone that sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just the desperate bluster of someone caught in fraud. This was something more deliberate, more threatening. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Marcus smiled, but it was entirely different from his usual warm expression. This smile was predatory, calculating. "Did you really think you were the only one I've been watching? The only one whose work I've been documenting?" Before I could respond, he continued. "3 other researchers in this department have been developing interesting innovations over the past 2 years. Sarah's network security protocols, Robert's database optimization algorithms, Jennifer's system integration frameworks. All very promising work. All carefully documented and filed under appropriate project leadership." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just stolen from me. He had been systematically appropriating the intellectual property of multiple colleagues, building an entire portfolio of stolen innovations to support his rise through the corporate hierarchy. "You're lying," I said, but even as I spoke, I was remembering conversations where my colleagues had mentioned sharing technical details with Marcus for strategic evaluation or business development support. "Am I?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a folder structure labeled Innovation Portfolio. The folder contained subfolders with each of my colleagues' names, filled with technical documents I recognized as their original research. "Sarah thinks I'm helping her navigate the patent application process for her security protocols. Robert believes I'm evaluating commercial applications for his database work. Jennifer assumes I'm preparing business cases for her integration frameworks." My stomach dropped as I realized the scope of what I was witnessing. Marcus had created an entire system for harvesting intellectual property from the R&D department, positioning himself as a helpful liaison while systematically documenting and claiming ownership of other people's innovations. "This is massive fraud," I said, my voice barely steady. "This is strategic career management," Marcus corrected. "And if you try to expose what you think you've discovered about Project Phoenix, I'll make sure everyone understands that you're just a disgruntled researcher trying to sabotage colleagues who are more successful than you are." He leaned back, against the conference table, his posture radiating confidence despite the technical disaster of his board presentation. "Here's what's going to happen, Elena. You're going to withdraw your documentation claims and publicly acknowledge that Project Phoenix was a collaborative effort under my leadership. In return, I won't file harassment complaints, performance concerns, or professional misconduct reports that could destroy your career. And if I refuse?" Marcus's smile widened. "Then I'll systematically destroy every professional relationship you have in this company. I'll document your unstable behavior and inability to work collaboratively. I'll raise concerns about your technical competence and professional judgment. By the time I'm finished, no one in this industry will want to hire you." The threat was delivered with such casual confidence that I realized Marcus had planned for this moment. He had anticipated that his theft might eventually be discovered, and he had prepared to destroy anyone who challenged him. But as I looked at his smug expression, I also realized something else. Marcus had just made a critical error. In his eagerness to threaten me into silence, he had revealed the full extent of his fraudulent operation. He had shown me evidence of intellectual property theft from multiple colleagues, documented his systematic approach to career advancement through fraud, and demonstrated his willingness to destroy other people's careers to protect his own position. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "I had no idea how this company really works. but I'm learning quickly. Marcus straightened, apparently interpreting my response as submission. Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable. Write a brief memo acknowledging our collaborative relationship on Project Phoenix, and this whole misunderstanding can be resolved professionally. I gathered my materials and headed toward the door, but paused before leaving. Marcus, there's something you should know about those technical questions the board asked today. He looked up expectantly. They weren't random concerns about scalability. David Park specifically asked me to attend this meeting because he had already identified inconsistencies in your presentation. The board has been suspicious of your technical claims for weeks. Marcus's confident expression faltered slightly. And those phone calls I made this morning? I wasn't just establishing my interest in the project. I was creating official documentation of my technical involvement with Phoenix Development, the patent attorney, the legal department, the CTO's office. They all have records now of my specific expertise and development timeline. I could see Marcus beginning to understand that his position was more precarious than he had realized. Most importantly, I continued, you just showed me evidence of systematic fraud involving multiple colleagues. Did you really think I wouldn't document this conversation? Did you assume I wouldn't inform Sarah, Robert, and Jennifer that their work is being stolen? Marcus's face had gone pale. You recorded our conversation? I didn't need to. You just told me exactly where to find the evidence of your fraudulent operation. Those folders on your phone? That documentation system you've created? All of it proves systematic intellectual property theft from multiple sources. The predatory confidence had drained from Marcus's expression, replaced by the dawning realization that he had revealed far more than he had intended. Elena, he said, his tone shifting to something approaching panic. You don't understand the consequences of what you're suggesting. If you try to destroy my career, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. You already tried to destroy my career when you stole 3 years of my work, I replied. The difference is that I have evidence, witnesses, and corporate support. What do you have? I left Marcus standing alone in the executive conference room, surrounded by the scattered remains of his fraudulent presentation and the weight of his own revealed threats. But as I walked toward the elevator, I knew the real confrontation was just beginning. Marcus still held a position of authority within the company, still had the support of executives who had invested in his success, still possessed the political skills that had enabled his systematic fraud in the first place. The evidence was overwhelming, but corporate politics could be more powerful than evidence. If Marcus could convince leadership that this was a personal dispute rather than systematic fraud, he might still survive the exposure and continue his predatory behavior with future colleagues. I had one more card to play, but it would require perfect timing and absolute precision. As I reached my floor, my phone buzzed with 3 urgent text messages. The first was from Sarah. Elena, Marcus just called asking me to clarify some technical details about my security protocols for a board presentation. This is the 3rd time this month. Is something wrong? The second was from Robert. Weird question, but has Marcus ever asked you to review someone else's database optimization work? He showed me algorithms today that looked familiar, but I can't place where I've seen them. The third was from Jennifer. Emergency department meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. Word is spreading that something major happened in the executive conference room today. Are you okay? I realized that Marcus's network of intellectual property theft was beginning to unravel on multiple fronts simultaneously. My colleagues were starting to ask the right questions, make the right connections, recognize the patterns of systematic fraud that had been hidden in plain sight. Tomorrow morning would bring more than just Marcus's impossible deadline to produce authentic technical documentation. It would bring a reckoning with every colleague whose work he had stolen, every innovation he had claimed, every career he had built on fraudulent foundations. The breaking point had arrived, and Marcus was about to discover that stealing from one person was manageable, But stealing from an entire department created an army of victims with no reason to protect his lies. Friday morning arrived with the weight of corporate reckoning. I arrived at the office at 6:15 a.m. to find the parking garage already busier than usual, a sign that word of yesterday's executive conference room incident had spread beyond the R&D department. The security guard's usual cheerful wave was replaced by a more subdued nod, suggesting that even the building staff sensed the tension permeating Meridian Technologies. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt longer than usual, but when the doors opened, I was greeted by an unexpected sight. Sarah, Robert, and Jennifer were already at their desks, laptops open, engaged in what appeared to be an intense collaborative investigation. The emergency department meeting wasn't scheduled until 8 a.m., but my colleagues had clearly decided to begin their own inquiry into Marcus's activities. "Elena," Sarah called out as soon as she saw me, "we need to show you something." I approached their impromptu workspace to find 3 laptops displaying technical documents, email threads, and timeline comparisons. The level of organization and detail was impressive and damning. "After you left yesterday, we started comparing notes about our interactions with Marcus," Robert explained. "What we found is systematic and disturbing." Jennifer turned her screen toward me. "Look at this timeline. In March of last year, Marcus approached each of us separately about collaborative opportunities and strategic evaluation of our individual research projects. The timeline was meticulously constructed, showing how Marcus had simultaneously engaged with multiple colleagues, positioning himself as a business liaison who could help translate technical innovations into corporate success. But more importantly, it showed how he had methodically collected comprehensive documentation from each researcher. "Here's the pattern," Sarah continued, highlighting entries across the timeline. "Initial contact, trust building through technical discussions, requests for detailed documentation, gradual positioning as project collaborator, and finally, preparation for presentations to leadership where he would represent our work as his own strategic vision." Robert opened a folder containing email threads with Marcus. "Look at the language he used with each of us. Identical phrasing, identical requests for technical specifications, identical promises about advancing our careers through his business development expertise." The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had operated like a systematic predator, using the same approach to harvest intellectual property from multiple victims. But what made the situation even more damaging was the sophistication of his deception. He had created detailed documentation systems, fabricated development timelines, and prepared comprehensive business cases that would have been convincing to anyone without access to the original research records. "There's more," Jennifer said grimly. "We reached out to colleagues in other departments last night. Marketing, systems integration, data analytics. Marcus has been positioning himself as a liaison with researchers throughout the company." My stomach dropped as I realized the true scope of what we were dealing with. This wasn't just theft from our R&D department. It was a company-wide operation designed to systematically appropriate innovations from across the entire organization. "How many people are we talking about?" I asked. "At least 12 that we've identified so far," Sarah replied. "Probably more. Marcus has been building a portfolio of stolen innovations for at least 3 years, positioning himself as the innovative genius behind breakthrough developments that were actually created by other people." Before I could fully process this information, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Janet Morrison's direct line. "Elena, please come to the executive floor immediately. Bring all of your Project Phoenix documentation." The urgency in her voice suggested that the corporate leadership had already begun their own investigation into yesterday's revelations. "I'll be right there," I replied, then turned to my colleagues. "Document everything you found. Make copies, create backups, ensure that nothing can be deleted or manipulated. This is about to become a formal investigation." The executive floor was bustling with unusual activity for 7:30 a.m. Janet's assistant directed me to the large conference room where I had confronted Marcus yesterday, but the setup was now entirely different. Instead of presentation equipment, the table was covered with stacks of documents, multiple laptops, and what appeared to be a formal evidence review process. Janet sat at the head of the table, flanked by David Park, the chief legal officer Maria Santos, and an external consultant I didn't recognize. Marcus was notably absent. "Elena, thank you for coming," Janet began, her tone professional but carrying an undercurrent of barely controlled anger. "We've been conducting an overnight review of the Project Phoenix situation, and what we've discovered extends far beyond what was revealed in yesterday's meeting." Maria Santos gestured toward one of the laptops. "Our IT security team conducted a forensic analysis of Marcus Chen's corporate accounts and project files. What they found constitutes the most extensive case of intellectual property theft in this company's history." She turned the laptop screen toward me, revealing a comprehensive directory structure labeled Strategic Innovation Portfolio. The folders were organized by researcher name, project type, and chronological development. A systematic catalog of stolen intellectual property that represented years of work by dozens of Meridian employees. Marcus maintained detailed records of his theft operation, David Park explained. Timeline manipulation, document fabrication, false attribution of authorship, all of it documented with corporate precision. The external consultant spoke for the first time. "I'm Detective Frank Morrison from the Corporate Fraud Division. Based on the evidence collected overnight, we're treating this as a criminal investigation. Marcus Chen is currently being interviewed by federal agents regarding charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit intellectual property crimes." My legs suddenly felt weak. What had begun as personal betrayal had escalated into federal criminal charges involving multiple victims and systematic corporate fraud. "Elena," Janet continued, "your decision to challenge Marcus's claims probably prevented this company from entering into fraudulent contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. The legal exposure we avoided is immeasurable." Detective Morrison consulted his notes. "The federal investigation will require detailed statements from all affected employees. Elena, your documentation proving the authentic development timeline for Project Phoenix has been crucial in establishing the pattern of systematic theft." Maria Santos opened a thick folder. "From a corporate perspective, we're conducting immediate termination proceedings, civil litigation to recover damages, and coordination with federal prosecutors to ensure full criminal accountability." The speed and thoroughness of the response was overwhelming. In less than 24 hours, Marcus's entire fraudulent operation had been exposed, documented, and turned over to federal law enforcement. "What happens to Project Phoenix?" I asked. "That's something we need to discuss," Janet replied. "The technology is legitimate and valuable. It was never fraudulent, just misattributed. You developed groundbreaking innovations that could revolutionize our industry. The question is how to proceed with proper attribution and development." David Park leaned forward. "Elena, we'd like to offer you the position of Director of Predictive Analytics, reporting directly to me. Project Phoenix would be yours to lead, with full corporate support, expanded budget, and the recognition that should have been yours from the beginning. The offer was everything I had worked toward for years: leadership position, direct executive, reporting, ownership of my innovations, and the resources needed to fully develop and implement my research. Additionally," Maria Santos added, "the company will provide full legal support for any civil actions you choose to pursue against Marcus Chen for damages, career impact, and emotional distress." Detective Morrison closed his notebook. Marcus Chen's fraud operation affected at least 16 researchers across 5 departments. The total value of stolen intellectual property exceeds $12 million. This will likely result in federal prison time and complete professional destruction. As I sat in that conference room, surrounded by evidence of justice being served, I realized that Marcus's systematic fraud had ultimately led to his complete downfall. His greed and predatory behavior had created an army of victims who were now cooperating with federal investigators to ensure his full accountability. "There's one more thing," Janet said, consulting her tablet. "We've discovered that Marcus was preparing to leave Meridian Technologies within 6 months, taking stolen intellectual property to a competitor company where he had already negotiated a senior executive position based on fraudulent claims about his innovation record." The revelation added another layer to Marcus's betrayal. He hadn't just been stealing from current colleagues. He had been planning to monetize that theft by selling our innovations to competing companies. "The competitor company has been notified of the fraud and has immediately withdrawn their employment offer," David Park added. "Marcus Chen's career in this industry is effectively over." Detective Morrison stood to leave. "Elena, we'll need your formal statement this afternoon, but I want you to know that your decision to document and challenge this fraud has prevented what could have been a multi-million-dollar corporate disaster." As the meeting concluded, I found myself holding the paperwork for a promotion that represented everything I had worked toward, achieved through the proper recognition of work that was authentically mine. But more than personal success, I felt a profound sense of justice for all the colleagues whose innovations had been stolen and whose careers had been threatened by Marcus's predatory behavior. The investigation would continue for months, the federal prosecution would take time to unfold, and the corporate changes needed to prevent future fraud would require ongoing vigilance. But the immediate reckoning was complete. Marcus Chen had built his career on systematic theft, threats, and predatory exploitation of colleagues' trust. In the end, his own documentation of that fraud had provided the evidence needed to destroy him completely. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration, protection of future victims, and ensuring that innovation would be properly rewarded rather than systematically stolen by corporate predators. 6 months later, I stood in my new corner office on the 20th floor, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold and amber. The view from the Director of Predictive Analytics suite was spectacular, but what struck me most wasn't the elevated perspective. It was the sense of belonging that came with occupying a space that had been earned through authentic achievement, rather than stolen credentials. My morning routine had evolved significantly since those early days of arriving at 6:47 a.m. to claim quiet time in a cramped cubicle. Now I arrived at 7 a.m. to find a department of 12 researchers already engaged in collaborative projects, their workstations arranged in an open-plan design that encouraged communication while providing individual focus space. The atmosphere was entirely different from the isolated competitive environment that had enabled Marcus's predatory behavior. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The months following Marcus's arrest and prosecution had been a period of intense corporate soul-searching, policy development, and cultural change. Meridian Technologies had committed to becoming a model for protecting intellectual property and preventing exploitation of innovative employees. Dr. Patricia Williams, the industrial psychologist we had hired to evaluate our departmental dynamics, had identified the structural vulnerabilities that had allowed Marcus's fraud to flourish, undetected. Isolated researchers working on individual projects, limited cross-team communication, centralized project coordination through single points of contact, and inadequate documentation of collaborative relationships. All of these factors had created an environment where systematic theft could operate with minimal risk of detection. The new structure was built around transparency, shared ownership, and collective accountability. Every research project now involved multiple team members from conception through implementation. Technical breakthroughs were documented through collaborative review processes that made individual credit clear while acknowledging team contributions. Most importantly, business liaison roles were distributed across multiple people with overlapping responsibilities, making it impossible for any single person to monopolize communication between researchers and corporate leadership. "Elena," called Sarah from the central workspace, "the MIT collaboration proposal is ready for your review." Sarah had been promoted to senior research coordinator following her instrumental role in exposing Marcus's fraud network. Her natural talent for organizing complex investigations had translated perfectly into managing multi-institutional research partnerships. The MIT proposal represented exactly the kind of external collaboration that would have been impossible under the old system, where Marcus would have positioned himself as the primary liaison and gradually claimed ownership of any resulting innovations. Reviewed the proposal at the conference table that dominated the center of our department. The circular design encouraged equal participation, while integrated technology allowed seamless sharing of documents, data visualization, and real-time collaboration with remote partners. Everything about the physical and operational structure was designed to prevent the isolation and information hoarding that had enabled Marcus's predatory behavior. "This looks excellent," I said, noting how the proposal clearly delineated individual contributions while establishing shared goals and mutual benefit. The quantum computing integration approaches could accelerate our predictive modeling capabilities by months. Robert, now our lead database architect, joined the discussion. "I've been working with Jennifer on the implementation framework. The beauty of this collaborative approach is that each institution brings distinct expertise while maintaining clear ownership of their innovations." The conversation was emblematic of how our department had evolved. Open communication, transparent, credit attribution, and mutual support had replaced the competitive secrecy that had made us vulnerable to exploitation. More importantly, the quality of our work had improved dramatically when researchers felt safe sharing ideas and building on each other's expertise. My computer chimed with a calendar reminder: 10 a.m. meeting with Janet Morrison and the board of directors to present our quarterly innovation report. These meetings had become opportunities to showcase genuine collaborative achievements rather than stolen individual work repackaged as executive vision. The executive conference room held no anxiety for me now. The same space where I had confronted Marcus's fraud was now a place where authentic innovation received proper recognition and support. Janet welcomed me with respect due to someone whose courage had saved the company from catastrophic fraud liability. "Elena, the board is particularly interested in the predictive maintenance contracts you've secured over the past quarter. The success metrics were impressive. 12 major corporate clients, implementation contracts worth $47 million, and industry recognition that had positioned Meridian Technologies as the leader in predictive analytics solutions. But more meaningful than the financial success was the knowledge that every achievement was built on legitimate innovation, rather than stolen intellectual property. The client feedback has been overwhelmingly positive," I reported. "The quantum-enhanced algorithms are performing beyond projected specifications, and we're seeing failure prevention rates that exceed our most optimistic initial estimates." Board member Dr. Elizabeth Chen leaned forward with interest. "How has the collaborative research model affected innovation timelines?" "Dramatically accelerated them," I replied. "When researchers feel safe sharing preliminary findings and building on each other's work, breakthrough developments happen much faster than isolated individual research. Our predictive modeling improvements over the past 6 months represent more advancement than we achieved in the previous 2 years." The contrast with Marcus's approach was stark. His model of hoarding information and claiming individual credit had actually slowed innovation by preventing the collaborative synergy that drives authentic breakthrough development. After the board meeting, I returned to find my department engaged in our weekly innovation showcase, where team members presented preliminary research findings for collaborative review and development. Today, Jennifer was demonstrating her latest work on system integration protocols that could revolutionize how predictive maintenance systems communicate across enterprise networks. The breakthrough came from combining Elena's temporal adjustment algorithms with Robert's database optimization approaches, Jennifer explained to the assembled team. Neither innovation would have achieved this level of performance independently. This was exactly what authentic collaboration looked like. Individual expertise combining to create solutions that exceeded the sum of their parts. with clear attribution and mutual benefit. The opposite of Marcus's predatory model where individual work was stolen and repackaged as false collaborative achievement. During lunch, I received a call from Detective Morrison with an update on Marcus's legal proceedings. The federal prosecution had concluded with a plea agreement. 3 years in federal prison for wire fraud and intellectual property theft, complete restitution of damages to affected employees, and permanent prohibition from working in any technology-related field. The restitution payments should begin next month, Detective Morrison explained. The court calculated damages based on career impact, emotional distress, and lost opportunities resulting from his theft of your innovations. The financial compensation was substantial, but what mattered more was the precedent established for protecting innovative employees from predatory colleagues. Marcus's case had been widely covered in industry publications, serving as a warning to potential intellectual property thieves about the serious legal consequences of systematic fraud. There's one more thing, Detective Morrison added. Marcus's former colleagues at his previous company have come forward with evidence of similar fraud patterns. The investigation is expanding to include his entire professional history. The revelation didn't surprise me. Marcus's sophisticated approach to intellectual property theft had clearly been developed and refined over years of predatory behavior. His downfall at Meridian Technologies had opened the door for other victims to seek justice for their own experiences of exploitation. That afternoon brought a visit from Dr. Amanda Foster, a researcher from Stanford who had been following our collaborative innovation model with interest. She was considering a similar structural transformation in her own department after identifying patterns of credit appropriation and research isolation. The challenge, Dr. Foster explained, is creating transparency without stifling individual creativity. How do you balance collaborative sharing with protection of preliminary ideas? The key insight, I replied, is that protection comes from documentation and process, not secrecy. When every interaction is recorded, every contribution is attributed, and every development stage is verified by multiple people, theft becomes impossible rather than prevented. I showed her our integrated documentation system, where every research conversation, technical insight, and collaborative development was automatically recorded and time-stamped. The system made credit attribution unambiguous while encouraging the open sharing that accelerated innovation. What about competitive dynamics between researchers? She asked. Competition still exists, but it's based on genuine contribution rather than political maneuvering, I explained. Researchers compete to provide the best ideas, the most elegant solutions, and the most valuable insights. But that competition happens within a framework where everyone's contributions are recognized and protected. Dr. Foster spent several hours observing our department dynamics, noting how naturally the collaborative processes had been integrated into daily workflow. The transformation hadn't required artificial team-building exercises or mandated cooperation. It had simply created structural incentives for authentic collaboration while removing the vulnerabilities that enabled predatory behavior. As the I-Psych-E day concluded, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from victimized researcher to department director. The experience of confronting Marcus's systematic fraud had taught me lessons that extended far beyond corporate politics or career advancement. The most important insight was that authentic achievement couldn't be stolen or fabricated. Marcus had been able to appropriate documentation, claim credit, and even fool corporate leadership temporarily. But he had never possessed the genuine understanding that came from actually developing innovative solutions. When challenged with technical questions that required real expertise, his fraud was immediately exposed. True innovation came from the intersection of dedication, creativity, and collaborative learning that couldn't be replicated through theft. Marcus had built his career on the stolen work of others, but he had never experienced the satisfaction of solving complex problems through personal insight and sustained effort. The sunset through my office windows painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, marking the end of another productive day in an environment where innovation was properly valued and protected. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Team celebration at 7:00 p.m. to recognize Jennifer's integration protocol breakthrough. You should join us. The invitation represented something that had been missing from my previous work experience: genuine collegiality based on mutual respect and shared achievement. Under Marcus's predatory influence, team relationships had been characterized by suspicion and competition. Now they were built on trust, collaboration, and collective success. Gathered my materials and prepared to leave the office, but paused at the window for one final look at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, other innovative employees might be experiencing the kind of exploitation I had endured. Other predators might be systematically stealing intellectual property while building fraudulent careers on other people's achievements. But my experience had proven that authentic innovation was ultimately more powerful than systematic theft. Truth was more durable than fabrication. And when innovative employees had the courage to stand up for their work and the structural support needed to prove their claims, justice was not only possible, it was inevitable. The future belonged to authentic collaboration, genuine innovation, and the kind of courage that refused to let predators prosper at the expense of dedicated researchers who deserved recognition for their contributions to human knowledge and technological advancement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new innovations developed through legitimate collaboration. But tonight, I would celebrate with colleagues who had become genuine partners in the pursuit of breakthrough discoveries that would benefit everyone involved. The liberation wasn't just from Marcus's fraud. It was from a system that had enabled exploitation and isolation. In its place, we had built something better, a community of innovators working together to push the boundaries of what technology could achieve, while ensuring that everyone received appropriate recognition for their contributions. That was a future worth building, protecting, and sharing with others who deserved the same opportunities for authentic success. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.